Hello, everyone. This is Alyssa Klein, VRS Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Specialist. Welcome to the training on Pre-Employment Transition Services Flexibilities. You might recall this slide being shared at the regional transition meetings that were held in March of 2020. RSA, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, announced clarification to the WIOA regulations in February of this year. And what they said is that pre-ETS funds may now be used for costs associated with providing certain regular VR services, along with the costs of the pre-ETS services themselves. Note that this is for students who are eligible for VR only. It's for students who need those services to benefit from pre-ETS, and that all of these services must be included on the employment plan. And we'll talk about this more later. Also note that, unfortunately, there are no changes in what we can pay for potentially eligible students. So that means the 5 required pre-employment transition services are the only services available to potentially eligible students with disabilities. Minnesota VRS did submit comments to RSA asking that they reconsider that and would allow us to at least fund some of the flexibilities they are announcing for those that are eligible for VR. And hopefully other states made those comments as well, so we will see. And I also want to note that while the content of the remainder of this presentation is good for our pre-ETS representatives to know about, unfortunately it does mean that the content in this presentation doesn't apply to you or the potentially eligible students you serve. Sorry. So you may recall, again, from those regional transition meetings in March, that I shared a list of possible flexibilities. And here is the list of the items our agency is moving forward with at this time. There were a few other options listed originally, but we need to wait on those items. So there are 2 key points to keep in mind. First of all, these services can be paid with pre-ETS funds only if the service is necessary for accessing or participating in pre-ETS services. Also, the flexibilities are all about which budget you are using when you fund for a service. Also keep in mind that there must be a comparable benefits search for all services that are in support of pre-ETS prior to providing those services. And as always, CFP does not apply to pre-ETS nor services in support of pre-ETS. So we have a new type and titles for authorizing for these services. The new type is called pre-ETS services in support of pre-ETS. And here is the full list of all the titles. I'm not going to read them off. I thought it would be helpful for you to have all of these on one slide, but I will be reviewing these titles as we go through the presentation. And Sherry Hendrickson will also be updating the service types and titles spreadsheet that is on SharePoint. So let's dig in to the new services in support of pre-ETS. The first is counseling and guidance. So obviously this wouldn't be a service that you would pay for, but it can be a service you charge your time and expenses for when counseling and guidance is provided as part of a pre-ETS service. So your time and expenses related to services in support of pre-ETS would be charged to the PETS code on your time entry and expense reports. So that applies to any of the services in support of pre-ETS. Okay, another category is referral services. We now can pay for intake fees for pre-ETS services with the pre-ETS budget. So the title for authorizing is intake fee for pre-ETS. Keep in mind that if you are referring a student to a provider for both pre-ETS and regular VR services at the same time, that you would just pay for the intake out of regular VR funds just to make it simpler. Also, we will still have to pay for a first meeting for potentially eligible students because we're not allowed to pay an intake fee for those students. All right, the next category is maintenance services. So you may provide monetary support for expenses such as food, shelter, and clothing that are in excess of normal expenses for participation in a pre-ETS service out of the pre-ETS budget. Here's the list of maintenance titles. And also keep in mind that our maintenance policy and guidance still applies. It is out of scope for this training for me to review all of that, but if you have questions, please refer to your policy manual to get some assistance. So a common example with maintenance might be clothing, shoes, uniforms needed for a work-based learning experience. The next category is transportation. So you can now authorize for transportation assistance for a student to participate in a pre-ETS service with the pre-ETS budget. So just like with maintenance, transportation policy and guidance applies. Here are the titles that are included under transportation. The next category is personal assistance services. These are services to assist a student in performing daily living activities that the student would typically perform without assistance if he or she did not have a disability. So these personal assistance services can only be funded with the pre-ETS budget in order to allow the student to participate in pre-ETS services. Again, the personal assistance services policy and guidance applies. And the title is Personal Assistance Services, or PCA, because that's the common term for personal assistance services for pre-ETS. Also keep in mind with this one that comparable benefits applies. Comparable benefits applies with all of these services in support of pre-ETS, but that's a big one for this because I imagine that we will not be authorizing this too often because typically students are getting supports for personal assistance services through the county or through the PCA services that are available in our state. Okay, next area is work-based learning coaching. So these coaches perform similar functions as job coaches do in supported employment settings by assisting students with learning to perform tasks assigned during the work-based learning experience. So the title is Work-Based Learning Coaching for Pre-ETS. So we're not calling it job coaching because students who are working while as a pre-ETS service is considered work-based learning. So work-based learning coaching is our new term. Next is books and supplies, tools, equipment. So these items can be purchased with the pre-ETS budget in order to allow for participation in a pre-ETS service. One thing to keep in mind is that this does not include books and supplies needed for PSEO or post-secondary education. It's only for, let's say they are in a workplace readiness training class and they need a book, or it's a self-advocacy class and they need something for that. You know, it's only to access or participate in a pre-ETS service. So in this area, we have two titles and those are listed here. So another reminder for you, just as with regular pre-ETS services, your time spent providing or arranging for the services in support of pre-ETS can be charged to the PREETS budget or PETS on your time entry and expense report. So keep in mind that even if a vendor is going to be providing the service in support of PREETS, oftentimes you are arranging for that service, so you could charge some time to it. And as always, you would track this time as PREETS on your Outlook calendar too. So employment plans and authorizations. PREETS, services in support of PREETS, is now an option in the type drop-down menu on the employment plan. So when you enter in a service, you have to pick the type, and now this is an option. And when authorizing, staff will be required to indicate which PREETS service the service in support of PREETS is supporting. So if you are, let's use the book example. A student needs a book in order to participate in the workplace readiness training class. So when you are authorizing that service in support of PREETS, you would pick workplace readiness training as which of the PREETS that service is supporting. And you only can choose one. So if it's going to support more than one of those PREETS services, just pick one. I'll give an example, which I think will make this easier for us all to wrap our heads around. So Valentina is a junior at Franklin High School who has been determined eligible for VR services. And based on the assessment of VR needs, the following activities will be included on her employment plan. So she will be participating in a 120-hour work experience that will be supported by one of our CRPs. In this case, it's RISE. She will also need work-based learning coaching, also to be supported by RISE. She needs black pants that's required for the work experience. And she also needs a bus pass that will allow her to get to and from that work experience. So these are the services on Valentina's employment plan. The first service is work experience. And again, you have to select a type. And so work experience is PREETS work-based learning. Note that on all of these, where you have to indicate services are provided by, you'll want to select both staff and non-VR agency, because RISE is providing the service, but you are also putting in time arranging for it. So select both staff and non-VR agency. The second service on her plan is work-based learning coaching. The type here is services in support of PREETS, or it actually says PREETS, service in support of PREETS. The third is clothing. Again, she needs black pants, so we're adding that service of clothing. And the type, again, would be PREETS, services in support of PREETS. And lastly is transportation, because she needs a bus pass. And the type is PREETS, services in support of PREETS. Now let's talk about the authorizations. So again, the vendor that will be supporting Valentina in her work experience is RISE. And so the first authorization would have 3 lines. The first line would say PREETS work-based learning work experience services. So again, she's going to be doing a 120-hour work experience, and RISE has said to start out with supporting her in the set site that they have, that they would need 5 hours to help orient her and follow up with her on that experience. So 5 hours at $75 an hour for that service. The second line would be PREETS work-based learning work experience wages, because RISE is going to be paying Valentina during that short-term work experience. So for this month, she's going to be working 40 of the 120 hours. So for the month of May, 40 hours at $12.50 an hour, because her wage is $10, and right now we're paying 25% of the wage as an admin fee. So it's $10 plus $2.50 equals $12.50 an hour. And line 3 is pre-ETS services in support of pre-ETS work-based learning coaching, because they will also be providing that service. And again, it's in support of pre-ETS work-based learning. When you are putting the authorization into Workforce One, it will ask which support or which service this is in support of. And so in this case, it would be in support of work-based learning. And for Valentina, it was decided that she would need 20 hours of the coaching. And on Rise's contract, it's $50 an hour for job coaching. So right now, our PT contracted providers would not have work-based learning coaching on their contracts. There will be an amendment period for our contractors coming up this year, and we will put work-based learning coaching on the contracts. In the meantime, you can use job coaching as the service on their contract, and just make sure that you're coding it as work-based learning coaching on the authorization. The second vendor in this case is Target, because again, Valentina needed some black pants. So figuring out the cost of those black pants, the authorization would be pre-ETS services in support of pre-ETS, and this would be maintenance, clothing, shoes, uniforms for pre-ETS. And again, you have to indicate which service this maintenance is in support of, and it's in support of work-based learning. Lastly, Metro Transit, because she needs a bus ticket. Again, pre-ETS services in support of pre-ETS. The title would be Transportation Bus Pass for pre-ETS. And once again, the service is in support of pre-ETS work-based learning. I'll just, let's see, go forward here. What to do about current plans and authorizations. So if you have a service that's on a current plan that will now be considered a service in support of pre-ETS, you can do a system generated change on the employment plan to change the service type. I imagine that a common example would be the work-based learning coaching. So if you currently have on a plan for a student to have job coaching to support them in a work experience, you can go in and do a system generated change to change the service type to service in support of pre-ETS. And in the future, you'll just want to make sure that instead of calling it job coaching, you would call it work-based learning coaching. You can also choose to reauthorize for services that will be taking place in the near future in order to use the pre-ETS budget. So once again, let's say you had job coaching, you could go in and redo an authorization as long as it hasn't occurred already, and title it service in support of pre-ETS, and then use, that would be the type, and then the title would be work-based learning coaching in the example I gave. So that is it. If you have any questions, as always, you can contact me at my email address listed here. Thank you all. Take care.